Today, the topic is on environment in China. And I want to share not only just the challenges we're having, since you must have heard so much of it, but also the efforts made to address the problem. And I also want to share the huge opportunities that we can work together on this. The last 40 years have seen tremendous growth, economic development in China. It has benefited our country, pulling hundreds of millions out of poverty. But the environment has paid a heavy price. The vast increase of pollution, air, water, have contaminated our air, water, soil, coastal seas, exposing hundreds of millions to health hazards. And our limited resources like water, groundwater, and soil have also been damaged by this wantonly discharge, and it also affects our social stability and long-term development. Last but not least, it has a huge regional and global impact. As the largest carbon emitter in the world, we understand that. Through years of research, I came to realize it's the real barrier to pollution control is the weak enforcement. We copy laws and regulations from the West, mainly from this country, but the enforcement remains to be very weak. And behind that, it's the local government officials who put GDP growth rate ahead of environmental protection, and it often interfere with the enforcement. Here in this country, some of our NGO colleagues and citizens will go to the court to drive enforcement. But in China, our judicial system still cannot function quite like that. So we must find some alternative way to deal with that. Otherwise, the cost of violation will always be lower than the cost of compliance. There will be no incentives. So I trust issues of in such a magnitude, of such a complexity, cannot be addressed without extensive participation. But people must be informed first. With that in mind, 2006, we founded IPE and started creating a national pollution database, and started with water and then extended to air, solid waste, hazardous waste, and energy and climate now. We decided that the best way is to, in China, data can be very sensitive, even now. Yeah, at that time, 2006, even more so. And there was a time when air quality data even that can be considered as some sort of secret. And so we decided that the way to do it is to compile the government-sourced data. It sounds beautiful, but when three of us started doing that with a group of volunteers from the universities, we found that there's simply not that much sources of government-sourced monitoring data that we can compile. So we have to, along with our partner, NRDC, developed an index and try to use that over the past 9 years to assess the performance of 120 cities. NGOs have not quite done that before, this effort. But we just have no choice, and we started doing that, and every year came up with this scorecard. And along with this journey, we started witnessing an expansion of transparency. The first year, 2006, we can only manage to collect less than 2,000 records of violations in a country with 3 or 4 million factories. But we can see along this road, and finally 2017, some 160,000 we can compile. And by analyzing this data, we find that it's not just like we are manufacturing for our own, but as the factory of the world, we're also paying some sort of environmental cost for that. This chart is mostly for carbon emission transfer, the embodied emissions, only from the clothing industry. But with the local emission, it's more or less the same. So we have to address issues like this. The waste got dumped in our backyards while cheap products got exported. So how do we do that? 2007, a group of NGOs, 21 of us, launched the Green Choice Initiative, calling for the consumers to pay attention to the products that they're buying and to promote the brands and retailers to green their supply chain in China. All those brands, we try to engage with them, and many of them would say that we have green policy, but in China, sorry, I just don't know who are polluting and who are not. I can only buy from the cheapest. But then I can give them our list of violators saying that, look, here you can find something. And one by one, some of the leading brands, pioneering brands, started doing that. I remember Nike, GE, and Walmart. Those are the first group. But not all of them easily want to face this issue, because some of them even quite bluntly told me that, if I touch it, I have to own it. You said it's free, then, but how much I have to pay, for all these problems caused by this. And so when we started engaging with the whole industry, because we want to level the playing field, we're not targeting any specific brands. And we have done not just the database research, but also go on the ground to check with our partners, NGO partners, to link those brands with polluting factories. And through the process, we can see, even with the IT industry, an industry many would deem as green or even virtual industry, the manufacturing of those gadgets that we're now all fully dependent on, can discharge not just normal pollutants, but even toxics and heavy metals, and having an impact not just on the ecosystem, but even on the local communities. But through the process, when we also found that to our great happiness, that when the brands started changing their sourcing policy, they can motivate with their massive sourcing power. They can motivate enormous corrective actions. Like in this case, not just the pipelines, got fixed, the discharge point got fixed, but even some of the legacy problems, like in this, you can see the rivers and lakes with the bottom laced with heavy metals. Some of them have taken their measures to deal with that. So when hundreds of electronic factories started taking action, we moved to the second industry, the fashion industry, and the 2.5 billion tons of textile wastewater is damaging the water resources, like this map showed in some of the most highly populated areas. The rivers are colored according to its level of pollution. Those black ones are simply just as the title of my colleague, Liz Economy, who's gonna talk, like the title of her book, The Water Runs Black, simply. And literally, you can see this discharge point. Every day, 280,000 tons of textile and chemical wastewater got rushed into that. But when we try to engage with those suppliers, with those dye houses, and they simply say that if I treat my waste but not my neighbor, then I'm going to lose my business, because the brands will favor a cheaper offer. And then luckily, one by one, those brands started comparing their list with our list regularly before they sign contracts. So all these 5, that's about 50% of the order of one of the top 10 dye houses in China. So this finally have motivated the company. They decided that the rule of game have changed. They're going to spend millions, tens of millions of dollars actually, to resolve the problem and building all these pipelines and wastewater treatment facilities. And to further helping benchmark, with all these brands, we created another index with our partner NRDC, the CITI, Green Supply Chain Index. Use that to assess more than 300 local and global brands, and every year coming up with with a list, with a scorecard. And we can see, I'm very happy to share with you, some of the leading factories, as leading brands, among the top 30. They are among the top 5, 4 of them, Apple, Dell, Levi's, and Nike. They're American brands. So they are the global leaders. And they, along with other, Chinese brands, including Huawei, have, and those from European and countries and Japan, they decided to incorporate the green choice process into their sourcing code, just like they check the quality of the products. They need to, before sign contract, they need to check our database. And this has motivated increasing number of factories to come to us to go through the process to fully disclose and try to resolve their problem. And you probably have all heard about this smog problem, and the smog issue have incited unprecedented concern in China. In the year 2011, when airplane would not be able to land, and when we probably can hardly see the other side of this theater, and behind that is the very fact that from the year 2000 to the 2011, in that slightly more than a decade, our coal consumption got tripled. And the original projection is for this to be peaked, to be doubled before we peak by 2040. That's already half of the world's total consumption. If we double that consumption, we can't afford, and the world can't afford. And luckily, people made their voice heard. The government changed its policy, started monitoring the PM 2.5, and disclosed that every hour to the public. But we also, along with our NGO partners, understand it's not enough. People also made their voice heard. It's not enough just to know which day to put on face mask or lock our children indoor. We have to find the solution. We have to tackle the sources. So the sources also need to be made public. So based on that thinking, a whole group of us, again, another initiative, total transparency initiative, calling for the real-time disclosure of the online monitoring data. This is something special. The government cannot trust the self-reporting because of the lack of credibility in our society. It's still quite serious issue. So they can't trust, so they have them to install all this auto monitoring. But for more than a decade, the data was not quite put in use. And we thought that it's better to have this disclosed fully to the public every hour. We thought it's going to take years, but to our surprise, the very next year, the government required this to happen. But it was on 30 platforms, and we trust that it's still not quite easy to use. We decided to tap into the power of mobile internet and developed our Blue Map mobile app, featuring the air quality data, obviously giving people a visualized way to see where all the air quality and help them to protect themselves and their families. And for the first time, started compiling all this, present all this water data. They have people to be able to access the data on the rivers and lakes and reservoirs in their region. And then the soil source, risk source data, this coastal sea data, and more than 1 million factories have been put on the digital map for people to access. And to visualize that, we turn those who are not in compliance will be in the color red, and those in compliance will be in the color blue. At the beginning, there was quite a lot of red colors and red dots, and so people started not just access the data, they can tweet it, they can share that on social media, on Weibo, and tens of thousands of this so-called micro-reporting have been filed, tagging in the official account of the agencies, and through that efforts, 1,800 of them responded and openly addressed their violation problem. Quite some of the red dots have been turned blue during the past nearly 5 years. And this is one of them, one of the cases, a large state-owned enterprises, a listed company. It's a huge iron steel factory. And every hour it was not in compliance. We call the, sometimes up, above 10 times above the standards. And we called the company, and they said, as a listed company, this is not quite important, and we couldn't do much. But our users continue to tweet this, to share this on social media, filing those reports until the local agencies finally weighed in and required the factory, the plant to solve the problem. And half a year later, they came up with this notice to us and to our partners saying that, openly saying that they require order three shaft furnaces to be shut down, lead to very big volume of emission reduction, 400 trillion micrograms of PM 2.5. And action plan on air pollution is going on. Along with that, another action plan on water. China has also initiated a clean water action plan. And the highlight of that is the government agencies decided to tap into the power of social media, and they allow our app as the first civil society application to be interconnected with them. So our users can take pictures of all these dirty rivers and file that through our app into the reporting platform. And according to the rule, we'll get an initial response within 7 working days. And last year, the central government have also rolled out the first ever drinking water source inspection. And the good part of that is that they disclose all this more than 7,000 problems identified. And this is the first map that we managed to present to the public with all the drinking water sources down to the county town level in China, colored according to its level of pollution. Everyone can check how those problems have been resolved. There has been some improvement. You must have heard that in the air quality in Beijing. It's down, the PM 2.5 level have done from 2013, it's 90 micrograms, and last year it dropped to 51. But if we want to go lower, 51 is still way above our own modest air quality standards, much higher than the American standards and WHO standards. So if we want to go lower, we need to go low carbon through the entire value chain. So with that in mind, with the first chart, you still remember all this embodied carbon. We decided to develop a new index called the Supply Chain Climate Action Index to help people understand that and help motivate the brands, because we see many of these brands actually have all this their supply chain, because they outsource. Most of them, they don't manufacture, and they outsource the manufacturing. So the supply chain impact footprint is by far the largest proportion, the blue part. And through our evaluation process, we can see only a handful of the brands can incorporate this into their plan, and only even fewer of them set target to drive down the supply chain side emission. But this is the lion's share. So with this in mind, we trust that if we want to achieve the Paris Agreement, all these brands, all the corporations need to extend their management into their commitment into the supply chain. So again, we're coming up with the top 30. Again, we're seeing Apple, Nike running neck and neck on top, and followed by Walmart, Cisco, and we see Dell and HP, Levi's also top performers. And so I think this has a lot to do with not just with the companies, but with the people, with the citizens here, just like all of you, who care about this issue. So this make the brands always, they pay more attention, the brands from America. But increasingly, China is becoming a consumer power of our own. Massive. Our own consumption, it has overtaken, by substantially the exporting industry. And so that is having a major impact, massive impact. Taking just the past 2 days, we keep hearing about all this infrastructure in China, construction in China. But behind that is the very fact that we consume, of course, the largest volume of iron steel. We consume nearly 60% of the global cement. And so as a result, the construction industry plus the real estate industry, these two have a carbon footprint roughly 8% of the global total. That's much larger, I believe, than most of the countries in the world. And so to help address that, a group of progressively minded property developers in China have decided to launch a green supply chain project for the real estate industry. And based on our Blue Map database, we come up with a first white list. We hope to turn that eventually into a green list on carbon as well. And the past 40 years, I think, the first 20 is almost like development at whatever cost. And then the last 20 years, we continue to see a change of rhetorics, policy, and then target setting. Everything got changed. But only the last 5 years, especially the last 2 years, we have seen the central government, the government decided to walk the walk. And tap into the central government authorities, sending down tens of thousands of inspectors across the country, and really working very hard to hold tens of thousands accountable, not just the polluting factories and their owners, but even the local officials, sometimes senior local officials who fail their duty. And during the process, the transparency, since the transparency level is also increasing, so more enforcement, more transparency, the result is a vast increase of data in our database. And so you still remember that 2,000 records in the year 2006, but earlier this year we just hit the 1.3 million mark, with all these violation records by the corporations, and plus all the hourly disclosed discharge data. Even the best brands find it challenging to try to follow so much information. So we decided to tap further into the technology and build something a little bit like blockchain, but it's called the eco chain, and which will allow all the access of push notifications on the cell phone for anyone, including all of you who pay attention to any factory's behavior. So it's called the eco chain, and it will give push notification and automatic report. And I'm happy to say that more than 30 brands started trying that out, and it helps them to move upstream more easily, not just stop at the tier 1, but tier 2, tier 3, and with a higher impact process. And now some of them have moved into the metal processing and chemical factories, chemical manufacturing, and motivate all of them to come. And some of the brands have decided to go even further. They more disruptive with their transparency. They put the logo of their brands on the digital map, on the location of their suppliers. So consumers, investors can click through and understand whether they are in compliance or not. So with all the efficiency enhancements, we can see this is about one week. Every week we come up with all this list. This is 1 week, all these brands can motivate their suppliers to us. Every day about 10 to 20 of them are coming to our office to try to resolve their violation problem. Beside the green supply chain, green finance is another leverage, and the government has a policy, but for a long time, access to information has been a problem. we are following more than 3,000 sources every day. It's highly scattering, but I'm happy to say this data finally started to be accessed to some of the financial institutions. And in response to their demand, we also come up with a dynamic environmental risk assessment tool for them. Based on this, started building China's environmental credit system for millions of factories in our country. With all of this said, we're not short of challenges. This is the first hourly data, hourly air quality data that we managed to bring together based on 4,000 monitoring stations across China. We can see that it's not just the problem of Beijing, it's a vast region, and we have to resolve the problem. We have relocated most of our factories to the surrounding regions, but it's keep coming back to us, unfortunately. And so along with the wind, and we can see all this going on. But still, there are vast improvements. In July, last July, we hit the record clean month, and this got many people excited, thrilled to share all the photos of the blue sky. And just like me, over the past several days, continue to take all this beautiful blue sky everywhere. I'm not sure how long before I got bored with this. Just like your president said, we're gonna keep winning. We're gonna keep the blue sky. And this is the December, but last December, we're seeing a rebound. Unfortunately, some rebound of the output of heavily polluting industry. And this January, more than 100 cities had some rebound of their pollution. And for the first time in several years, our coal consumption, there's some sort of rebound there. And obviously, all these are not positive. And with this, people talking about the impact of the slowdown and the potential trade war and stability of financial system, it also is having an impact on the environmental policy. And we hope to use to help people visualize that things are still there, keep them on vigil. I want to close by saying that our challenges are still quite there, and we're facing a severe challenge. It matters to China, it matters to the world, matters to this generation and our generations to come. And obviously, we are making some efforts, and the social progress made in China, with the rising public awareness, the changing government policy on the environment, and also the expansion of transparency. It brings forced an opportunity for us to tap further into the technology. So I put the QR code here, just for anyone who want to get a sense, some access to the data we compiled with a very crude English version, not functioning perfectly. I tested, run myself, I got frustrated, but I hope we can improve that, because I do feel that it's primarily our own duty. It's our land, our people, and our factory. We have to manage that. But in the meantime, I really appreciate your attention to the environmental issue, to the issue across the Pacific, because I do believe together there's a better chance for us to scale up our emission control, make it far more efficient, effective, and together there's a better chance for us to preserve the beautiful planet home. Thank you very much.